Good to see your faces. It's good to be with you this morning. If we have not met, my name's Aaron, and I'm one of the pastors here, and just excited to be with you. And it will be interesting to see how this morning goes. We have been in a series called the Sermon on the Mount, and we've been looking at really what is Jesus's, you might call Jesus's kingdom manifesto. Where he's painting a picture of the kingdom of God, of what God is doing in the world, where he's taking all of this and really painting a vision of what it looks like to be God's kingdom people in a world that really works very differently than the kingdom of God. So a lot of what we've looked at is counterintuitive, it feels upside down, it's challenging, it's forcing us to kind of rethink the way that we live in this world. And I'll tell you this, just a moment of confession, when I knew that we were going to do this series, this was the week that I was dreading. I was not looking forward to this week. And, you know, there's some messages when you get up and give as a pastor, and they're fun. This is not one of those. Like there's some that they're like, it's positive, it's life-giving, it's exciting, it's compelling. And this is one of those that's just kind of hard. And honestly, I didn't really know how I was going to address this one. And so I think Mike might have shared this particular beatitude is Jesus steps up and he says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And I hear that and I think, well, I'm screwed. Like if what he's saying is that really it's the people who really get this right, who really have like spirituality and the Christian faith figured out, who live lives that are blemishless, mostly sinless, very righteous, hearts that are never conflicted or have mixed motives or ambitions or thoughts. If that's what he means, like I don't know how to spin this one. You know what I mean? Because I know myself, and I know my heart, and I don't think I can't think of a moment in my life when there's not at least there's different things going through my heart. I can't think of a moment where I could say in confidence, my heart is pure. No mixed motives, no hidden ambitions, completely selfless and righteous. Can anybody say that? I think of Brennan Manning. And anybody here familiar with Brennan Manning? Ever read some Brennan Manning? Brennan Manning is one of my heroes, and no longer alive. But man, he wrote some books that just changed my life when I was a young man, still a young man, and I still read his stuff, and just such an impact. But Brennan Manning was a priest who fell in love with a woman and got married and then got kicked out of the priesthood, kind of became a pseudo-pastor, wrote some phenomenal things, lived an incredible life. Part of his story is that he struggled his entire life with alcoholism. And he did before Jesus and he did after Jesus. And he did before he was a priest and after he was a priest and after he was a pastor. And at different times in his life, honestly, it caused him to be homeless. He was on the streets at the bottom of a bottle. And so Brennan Manning used to say things like, I am a walking contradiction, and I hear that and I'm like, yeah, I can get on board with that, One of my favorite quotes that he used to say is he would say, Aristotle said, I'm a rational animal. I say I'm an angel with an incredible capacity for beer, and I get that, like he's putting his finger on this thought, it's like there's moments in my life where I really feel like I'm doing it well, like I'm walking with Jesus, I'm seeking to live my life in a way that honors God, and God is really at work in and through me, but then it's like in the next moment, I want to lose myself at the bottom of a bottle. And I get that, So when I hear Jesus say, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God, I just think, oh no. I don't really know what to do with that. And to make matters even worse, in the Greek, it's the imperative. It says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they alone shall see God. And I at least I find a little solace in knowing that some of the writers of the Scriptures wrestled with this idea of being called to righteousness, being called to purity. And so like the writer of Proverbs 29 says this, he says, who can say, I've kept my heart pure, and I'm clean and without sin? Who can say that, right? And the insinuation is like, I can't. Can you? Can any of us? I can't. But here's the rub. Here's the thing. While I read this and this beatitude, and in some sense it feels very intimidating and in a sense unattainable, when I open up the scriptures and really let it speak for itself and read it through, I mean, from beginning to end, I can't deny how important and imperative having a pure heart is. Because we find it actually all over the place, Old Testament and New. Listen to Psalm 24:3. It says this. It says, "Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart." Right? And so all of this points to one kind of big question, and that is, in this beatitude, is Jesus asking something of us that is unattainable? Or is it possible for ordinary people like you and I to actually experience a pure heart, to attain a pure heart, to be this, and not just to pretend, but to really walk in it and experience it? And I think the answer is yes. But another confession, just so you guys know, this morning, I feel like the dust hasn't fully settled in my mind on this one. And so this morning, I'm leaning on the thoughts of others a little bit more than normal. And what I'm going to share is really from just where I'm at in my understanding, very incomplete understanding on this one. And I know every week I get up here with an incomplete understanding of anything I ever present, But this week I'm just a little bit more tuned in to just how incomplete my understanding is. So I say that just because as we talk about this morning, you just need to know, you're just going to need to exercise some discernment of your own and really process this through and really let the text speak for itself, and we'll just see what God does. Does that sound good? All right, so what I want to do is I want to talk around really two questions this morning. And the first one really is what is a pure heart? What's its nature? What's its essence? What are we actually asking God for when we ask him for a pure heart? What is it? And then the second one really is, how do I get one? Where do I get one? If, in fact, it is attainable. If. So here we go. So, number one, if you're taking notes, a pure heart is internal in nature. It's internal in nature. And all of God's people said, duh, right? I mean, it's a little bit obvious, right? Even if you don't believe in God, even if you are somewhere else kind of spiritually on the faith spectrum, I think most of us understand that when we're talking about the heart, right, we're talking about something that's internal in nature. When somebody says oh, that really came from the heart, or he really put a lot of heart into that, or that was heartfelt, that we know that we're talking about something that goes beneath the surface, something that's internal. All right, the prophet Samuel, when he had to explain why God chose David as king and not his older, more physically impressive brothers, he said this, which is very important for us. He says, look, right, man looks at the outward appearance, and he tends to be pretty impressed by what he sees at times, and he's swayed by what he sees. But God is looking at something different. God is looking at the heart, always, first and foremost. That's what God cares about. When God looks at a man, when God looks at a woman, he looks at their heart. Right, and so we find elsewhere, it says in another place, it says, so guard your heart. Right, and so if this is in fact what God looks at when he sees you and I, if this is really what he cares about most, then we have to treat the heart with the kind of centrality, the kind of importance that it really carries. And so it says, so above all else, Proverbs 4:23, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from in here. Everything. Right? The word heart is talked about 900 times in the scriptures. 900 times. And when it talks about the heart, most of the time it's not talking about, the muscle that is beating inside of your body. What it's talking about is you, really you. It's the seat of your personality. The heart is the center of your identity. It's the real you. It's who you really are. So blessed are those. Blessed are those who have something real in here, something that is real and good and true. Now, when Jesus stepped up and said this, for us, it might take us back a little bit. It does me. It might feel a little bit intimidating and unattainable, but there were people who heard these words when Jesus spoke them on that mountain, to which this was very, very good news. In fact, I think it was so good that for some people, they had a hard time believing it at first. And one of those people, as we've talked about, I feel like we just keep coming back to it in this series, are the poor. The poor are central in the kingdom of God. And for those of us who live as kingdom people in the world, we cannot afford to ignore the poor. And in Jesus' day, one of the reasons for just the abject poverty that was all over the place in this particular land, part of the reason was, of course, the Roman oppression and their rule, but the other part of that was a corrupt temple system. Right? And religion had become really big business. And so in the process, there were people that became very, very rich in the religious business, but most people were very, very poor. And in order to actually participate in the temple system, you had to have money. In order for you to participate, they had very, very expensive things. It was expensive to participate in the various expressions of worship. So things like purity codes and all the ceremonial washings. And these were the things, by the way, what they were taught, these are the things that made you clean or unclean, pure or impure. Right? And so if you had the money and you were willing, man, double bonus. But when it came to the poor, the poor could not even participate, and so it really didn't matter how much they loved God. They were deemed, at least by the religious system, as impure, unclean. And as some of you know, all kinds of things made you unclean. All kinds of things. So if you got sick or you had a disease, you were deemed unclean, impure. If you touched somebody who was sick or had a disease, you were deemed unclean, impure. A woman's menstrual cycle made her impure, unclean. Gentiles were deemed impure, unclean. If you did business with a Gentile, if you ate with a Gentile, would make you unclean and impure. Right? Sin, of course, made you unclean and impure. But the thing is, you didn't even have to sin. All you had to do was not be able to participate. Just not participate in the temple worship system, and you were deemed unclean, impure. And then Jesus gets up and speaks these words. He says, no. No, blessed are the pure in heart, for they will see God. And again, I think there were some that had a hard time accepting it, but in that moment, there had to be the thought, like maybe, just maybe, to the lepers, right, to those with various sicknesses and diseases, in the hearts of the poor and the marginalized, and to all those people who have been told their entire life, you're not good enough. Right? Maybe, just maybe, there's another way. Maybe, just maybe, what God really cares about is not so much the cleaning and purifying on the outside, as much as he's concerned with the cleaning and purifying of what's in here. Right? In fact, this is exactly what Jesus said in Matthew 23. To the Pharisees and the scribes and the chief priests, the very people who are running this corrupt religious business, this is what he says to them. He says, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. Boom, he's not out to make friends. He's just going to say how it is. You hypocrites, you clean the outside of the cup and dish, but inside you're full of greed, self-indulgence. Blind Pharisee, first clean the inside of the cup and dish, and then the outside also will be clean. He said, you're blind, you can't see. You can't see. In fact, he would say a number of these things in his time. He would call them blind Pharisees, blind men, blind guides, blind fools. And he says, look, you are doing all this religious business, but God knows your heart. So I think it's just worth just pausing for a moment this morning, just stopping and just reflecting on the answer to this question, and that is, how's your heart? Really. Because you can fool me, and I can fool you, and we can all fool each other. But how's your heart? How's your heart really? As you reflect back on 2015, we just turned the corner into a new year. If you had to describe what your heart's been like in this last season, what kind of words would you use? Could you say that my heart has been really, really soft and open to God and whatever he might want to say to me and whatever he might ask of me and want me to start or stop or wherever he wants to lead me, I'm open and receptive to that. Or would some of us be honest enough to say, that has not been me in this last season. In fact, if anything, I'm pretty closed off. My heart is pretty hard. I can't answer that for you. When Jesus stood up and said this, he wasn't saying anything new. And the truth is, if you've been around church for any length of time, even what we're talking about this morning, it's not new, you know what I mean? Like most of us have heard this kind of a thing. It's not new information. When Jesus stepped up, it wasn't brand new information, right? So Jesus is, even though he's facing off this very corrupt religious system, what he's not preaching against is really authentic Judaism. In fact, if anything, Jesus is calling people back to the heart of authentic Judaism, right? Jesus said, look, I did not come to abolish the law, I've come to fulfill the law. And so it's not like Old Testament was law and New Testament is grace, and Old Testament was all about ceremonial washings and New Testament is about the heart, right? The truth is it's always been about the heart. God has always cared most about the heart. The first commandment has always been, right? Or the first command of the law has always been, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, with all your strength. Right? Isaiah, long before Jesus, 29:13, God said this through Isaiah. These people come near to me with their mouth, and they honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. They're doing all kinds of religious business. They're praying to me. They're singing songs in my name. But all I ever wanted was their heart. And their hearts are far from me. God has always been about the heart. And Jesus is reminding of us of that truth. Secondly, if you're taking notes, a pure heart is undivided in nature. A pure heart is undivided in nature. And this is where it gets a little bit intimidating. Because a pure heart, it sounds, like a sinless heart, heart without blemish, a perfect heart, a righteous heart. But I think more than that, at the very least, it means having a whole heart. Think of like a single-minded heart, right? So like Jesus, when he says, look, you can't have two masters. It's either God or money. You can't serve both. Essentially, you're going to love one and you're going to end up despising the other. So you got to choose, A whole heart says like, I'm going this way or I'm going that way, But a divided heart says, I like Jesus on this and I'll follow him. But look, I really don't like what he has to say over here. And so I'm going to go do my own thing. I think of words like an undivided heart, a congruent heart. Words like integrity come to mind, authenticity. Essentially, that the actions that are happening out here are consistent. They're flowing from what's really going on in here. So think about it just for a moment, like people you really trust. Maybe it's a single person, somebody you really trust. Right? And I would suggest to you really trust them because they're pure in heart. There's integrity, there's consistency. You kind of get the sense of what you see is what you get. That's really who they are. They really mean what they say. Right? But if you think of somebody you don't trust for a moment, I would suggest to you the opposite's true. Right? There's not a purity of heart. In fact, there's a lack of integrity. And you kind of feel like, I don't really buy into what's coming out of their mouth. I mean, like I hear them saying it, but it doesn't actually seem to mean what they say. Like they're being nice to me, but I kind of feel like it's because they want something in return. Right? There's a lack of integrity, a lack of congruence. There's a lack of purity in heart. Right? A purity in heart, there's consistency. It's what you see is what you get. That's really who they are. Right? What you see happening out here, it's really flowing from what's going on in here. It matches. Right, the reason Jesus had such beef with the Pharisees is it didn't match. Right, in fact, it was worlds away from each other. They were doing all this religious business, but their hearts were not in it. And so Jesus says in Matthew 6, the very next chapter from the one that we're in, and he calls them out and he says, look, you guys are doing so much good religious business. You're praying. You're giving alms to the poor, which is like above and beyond tithing commitments, giving to the poor, and it looks like you have a generous heart, and it looks like you love God, but you don't. He said the only reason you're doing that is to get noticed. It's the whole point. And so he says, you've got your reward. You wanted to be seen. You were seen. You wanted to be admired. Guess what? Everybody admires you, and you got it. He says, but the one thing they didn't get to see was God. And he was standing right in front of their face. And they missed him as he was there. And I don't know if you just imagine with me for a moment what it would be like to sit in spaces like this for most weeks, for the rest of your life. To pray prayers, to sing songs, to consume books, to listen to podcasts, and to never, ever be overwhelmed by the presence of God. To never experience the transcendent, right? God in your midst in a way that takes your breath away, and you just have to step back and say like, man, God is in this place, Look at what he's doing here and here. The hard truth that Jesus is really pointing out here is that is very, very possible. Especially in spaces like this where it's so easy to pretend. I was thinking about it this week and just kind of marinating on this, and I just had a thought, I just started thinking about just the danger of pretending. Which for us is pretty relevant because it is so tempting to pretend with one another and to present ourselves as actually doing a lot better than we are, never asking questions or being honest about the doubts that we have, just kind of always putting on that face and smile. And I think what Jesus is really getting at is pretending is one of the most dangerous things that we can do because it creates in us like this duplicity that stands in the way of authentic, true spiritual growth. In authentic spiritual growth, there's no, you just fake it until you make it. And so I actually wondered, I had the thought, I wonder if it's actually at times more advantageous and better to be wholeheartedly, fully committed to your sin, wholeheartedly sinful, right? Just honest and transparent in your full-fledged rebellion against any God, if there is one, or what he might want from you, than to actually be double-minded, divided heart, half-hearted, presenting yourself better than you are, just kind of faking and pretending. Because here's the irony of all this, especially as it relates to this beatitude, is that the Pharisees, who, by the way, were way more committed to their religion than any of us in this room are, who put forth so much effort in all kinds of ceremonial washings and purities and worship and all these different things, they were the last to recognize Jesus as being someone sent by God. And it was actually some of the most sinful, the wholeheartedly sinful, right, prostitutes and adulterers and thieves and tax collectors, and they were the first to actually start to recognize Jesus as someone being sent by God. And I wonder if in there is really a challenge for us to make a conscious commitment to not ever, to stop pretending. All right, to let the walls come down and just admit at moments that, I don't know if I buy this. Tonight, if I'm honest, I would rather get lost in a bottle than lost in the Gospels. I'd rather drink than pray. I'm not sure that God exists or that he's good. Because I believe that those are the moments that God shows up. And that's a heart that actually can begin to see God, even if we choose ultimately to reject him. It seems those were the people that recognized Jesus first. And ironically, the religious people recognized him last. I just think there's something in here before we move on. And I wonder if maybe there's a little bit of a gut check that just needs to happen for some of us. Because maybe, if you've logged a lot of time in church and been around conversations like this for a long time and have counted yourself a Christian for a very long time, and yet you would have to admit that it's been a very long time since you experienced God in any kind of profound, tangible way. Maybe you've listened to plenty of sermons from guys like me that drone on for 30 minutes, and yet you can't remember the last time that God took your breath away, or you experienced him in a way that you couldn't even fully explain. You just knew that God was at work in this moment. Then maybe, just maybe, this morning, you need to take a really honest, gut check level look at your heart. I think there's something there for us. And all of this kind of leads us to the second question, which is, how exactly does one attain a pure heart? Where does it come from? How do I get one of those? And I would submit to you this based on my limited understanding of what I understand about this one. And that is that a pure heart is in the making. A pure heart is in the making. The kind of heart, and it's in the making when we start to actually recognize first the need for a pure heart, and that we get honest enough that to ask, maybe, just maybe, I don't have one, and begin to become aware that you and I can't create this kind of heart in ourselves. Not on our own. We can't muster it up or do it on our own. Because the fact is that if you want a pure heart, one of the first things we got to have is a new heart. The kind that only God can give us. Ezekiel 36, God is speaking through the prophet to his people about a new covenant, about a new way of being together. And this is what we find in verse 26, is that he says it begins with a new heart. It says, I will give you a new heart, says God. It's all going to start there, right? A pure heart begins with a new heart. It says, I will give you a new heart and put a new spirit in you, and I will remove from you your heart of stone. And I'll give you a heart of flesh. And I just want to sit on that and think about that for a moment, that heart of stone. A heart of stone is a hard heart. Right? In a heart of stone, there's no life. Right? A heart of stone doesn't feel anything, right? And so if you have a heart of stone, that's not really something you can just renovate and make a little bit better. What we need is a new heart. Verse 27, he continues, he says, and, by the way, I will put my spirit in you and move you to follow my decrees and be careful to keep my laws. Why? Why follow decrees? Why keep God's law? Why seek to walk in a way that honors God? Because we want to. And why do we want to? Because we've been given a new heart. And I would say this is where the rubber meets the road, right? And if you want to know and really kind of do a gut level check, and you've got the courage to do so, and ask whether or not you have a new heart, right? I would say the mark of the redeemed. The evidence of that is that God has and continues to give you new desires. Right? He's changing the kind of things you want. You might have these moments where you want to do something really stupid and you know it's wrong, but you still kind of want it and you still do it, But I mean, in the long run, it's changing. Right? And it's some of the things that you used to lose yourself in and you didn't think twice about, all of a sudden some of those things are kind of losing their appeal and you find yourself not wanting to do them anymore, less and less anyway. And you find yourself actually wanting to do the right things more and more. Psalm 37:4 speaks to this. It says, take delight in the Lord, and he will give you the desires of your heart. Right? What is that about? It's not necessarily about, delight yourself in the Lord, and he'll give you the Maserati you always wanted, or the house at the end of the cul-de-sac or whatever. Right? It's really about changing your heart. It's changing your desires. Right? It's delight yourself in the Lord, and God is actually going to start to change the things that you want. Right? Psalm 27:8. It's David again. It says, when talking to God, he says, my heart says of you, seek his face. And so your face is what I'm going to seek, Lord. Why did he want to seek his face? Was it because a law said it? Was it because his pastor told him to? Was it because he felt, whatever? It's like, no, it's his heart. He desired it. Right? It's a sign of a new heart, a redeemed heart. And I would suggest to you and here's the thing, none of us does this perfectly. But if you do find in yourself, when God calls you on those moments, those moments when you just know, I should do that, I shouldn't do that. That's what it looks like to honor God and do the right thing. I know this. That is not. And you find in yourself not a desire to do the right thing, but more of just a cold, it's like, no, I'm just going to do what I want. I mean, I think there's a hard truth there, and that is that if that's you, you don't have this kind of heart. A new one. And very important thing to say is what this doesn't mean is that you do it perfectly, right? And one of the things that I find great hope in is King David. King David was called a man after God's own heart, but oh my goodness, did he screw up royally at times. I mean, he crashed and burned, and he committed sins more heinous than you or I probably will ever commit. But here's the thing. Right, when David screwed up, as you will screw up and I will screw up, he would say things like this in Psalm 32. My bones wasted away through my groaning all day long. My strength was sapped as in the heat of summer. Now, why does he say things like that? Right, I would suggest to you it's because no matter where David went and no matter what David did, he couldn't get away from his heart. And so there are moments when we want to, and we do stupid things, sinful things. That's coming, right? But the mark of the redeemed, what a new heart does is grieves. It's like Paul in Romans 7. He's like, I keep doing things I hate, and I hate that I do them. Right? Why is that? It's because Paul had a redeemed heart. And God was shaping and reshaping his desires to desire the right things. So circling back, the first thing that every single one of us needs if we are to have the kind of pure heart Jesus is talking about is a new heart. And in a room this large with this many people, there's some people in here, and that's exactly what you need. A new heart. And that starts, by the way, by simply asking for it. And that's something you can actually do this morning. Right? Asking God to give you a new heart, a heart of flesh, a heart that is alive. Right? But for a lot of us, I think for a lot of us in this room, chances are that's probably not what we need. Because the truth is, for a lot of us, we were given a new heart a long, long time ago when we said yes to Jesus. When we first believed that God is in the business of giving away new hearts and redeeming people. But maybe, just maybe, what I'm going to venture to guess is for a lot of us, what we do need, though, is a renewed heart. And coming back to David again, this is David in Psalm 51, very likely right after he committed one of his big blunders. And this is what he says in verse 10. Create in me a pure heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation and grant me a willing spirit to sustain me. All right, renew a steadfast spirit within me. Renew my heart. In closing, I want to just talk very briefly about a parable that Jesus told in Matthew 13 about 4 different soils. And I had the idea what I wanted to do is actually have this really cool, sexy table and have 4 jars of soil. And so if you could just imagine that we did have a sexy table and 4 really cool jars of dirt, that would help me out. But Jesus talks about these 4 different kinds of soil and a farmer who sowed seed in this field in these 4 different kinds of soil. And they responded to the seed of God's word of its truth, the kingdom of God, the gospel, in 4 very different ways. And he talks about the good soil. Right? And the good soil was receptive to what was being said. And it received the seed, and the seed actually grew and produced a harvest, and life sprung up from the seed. But then he talks about a different kind of soil, and that's the weedy soil. And the seeds were planted, and it started to grow. But just as soon as they started to grow, the weeds actually choked the life out before it could really bloom and really flourish. And then he talks about the rocky soil, and in Palestine, it's really common to find in fields. You have kind of a thin layer of soil, but then you've got very large boulders and rocks that are underneath. And what ends up happening is the seed is sown, and it starts to grow, but the roots can only go so deep. There's resistance underneath. And so once that sun starts really heating up in the heat of the summer, it scorched the seed and killed the plants before they could produce a harvest as well. And then he talks about the hard soil, where people travel along and walk. And the hard soil is, it's just so hard that, when the truth is spoken and the seeds are cast, it just kind of bounces right off, which I'd, venture to guess is happening in here today. Maybe you, it's like, yeah, blah, 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 blah. I want to get lunch, wrap it up already. Right? And Jesus talks about these 4 different kinds of soil. And the thing is, whenever I've heard this taught on prior to this week, or a couple weeks ago, I always heard it talked about like 4 different kinds of people. And so you had the good soil people, and then you had the weedy soil kinds of people, and the hard soil, and the rocky soil, but the thing is, and Dave Johnson kind of opened my eyes to this, is Jesus is not looking at 4 different fields. He's looking at one field. And maybe part of having a pure heart and going on that journey is recognizing first that all 4 soils exist in my one heart. And that there are parts of my life, and probably yours, where you would say, in that area of my life, I have been receptive and soft, and it's been fertile ground, and God has done a really cool work there. But there's other areas of my heart, my life, that I can't really say that. Areas of my life where I've been actively disobedient, and there are weeds there, and every time God starts wanting to grow something there, it's like it just chokes the life right out. In other areas of my life where I've just only allowed God to take me so deep, it's shallow soil. And so, there's really no lasting fruit. There are really hard parts of my heart where every single time I hear a pastor like you, say something like this, or I hear a podcast or a book, I just am shut off because I don't want to hear it when it comes to that. And so my challenge this morning is to open yourself up to that. My hope and my prayer is that we, like David, could pray this prayer. And David prayed, Lord, search me and try me. I know my heart, know my anxious thoughts, and see if there is not a wayward way within me. And maybe that's a prayer that maybe most, if not all of us, need to pray this morning. And so here's what I want to do. We're going to enter in a time of worship to close, as we always do. But before we get to singing, what I really want to do is carve out a little bit of space. A little space for us to get quiet and get honest and pray that prayer. Lord, search me, try me. Show me where the hard soil is and the weedy and rocky soil. Show me what maybe you want to do in me as we begin this new year. All right, so band, if you could come on up, and if you guys, Joshua, would you mind hitting the lights? And I'll set us up in this time as we come into the Lord in prayer. Lord God, I am well aware of the fact that most of us are probably a lot more comfortable with noise and activity than we are with quiet. But Lord, I never want to be guilty of just adding more noise to people's lives. There's certain work that I believe can only be done in the quiet. And as people, we are masters of self-deception. When it's not pretending to others, it's pretending to ourselves. And for some of us, I think there are weeds that need to be pulled from the root, and the only way I know how to do that is on our knees in prayer. And so, Lord, we invite you into this moment, into this space. As we come before you, Lord, my prayer, and what I hope will be our prayer, Lord, is search us and try us. See if there is any wayward way within us. Show us, Lord, where the bad soil is.